Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Your host is Debra, CEO of Rue Global Impact and co-founder and chairwoman of Billion Strong, an identity and empowerment organization designed to bring billions of voices of persons with disabilities together. To join the global community and to donate to the cause, visit billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org. And now, on to the episode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Debra Rue, and I'm the CEO of Rue Global Impact. And we work with brands all over the world, helping them meaningfully include people with disabilities in their workforce. But we also are very focused on social justice and social good. So, really helping brands show the world that they are better brands. Also, the executive director of Billion Strong, which we're very excited about, identity and pride in our community. And my guest today, I'm really excited about her work. I've been watching her work, and she has a couple advisors that I really admire. Frances West, a very dear friend of mine, former chief accessibility officer for IBM, still heavily engaged in our field, author, and just an amazing woman, grandmother too. And then John Kemp, which I hope y'all know who he is. He's an amazing, terrific lawyer, CEO in our field, and he's just an amazing man. So both of these leaders are on her board, and that certainly piqued my interest. And then I started seeing some of the stuff they were doing, and I thought, oh, I got to have Charlotte on the show. So before I turn it over to Charlotte, I'm going to just give you a quick description. I am a mature woman. And that doesn't mean old. I've decided mature, not old. But I'm a mature woman with white and gray hair and purple streaks through it. And today I'm wearing a little a little bluish. I forget what this pattern is called. Anyway, it's a blue pattern. Yes, gingham, right?
Yeah.
Love that pattern. And I have on purple glasses. So Charlotte, welcome to the program. I'm really looking forward to talking about what you're doing, because what you're doing is what the industry and the community needs. More than anything else, we need you. So I'm very excited about your work, and happy Nadim, National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And because your episode comes out in October 2022. So we're really stoked about that. But Charlotte, let me turn it over to you so you can introduce yourself and your company and give a visual description too.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm Charlotte Dales. I am a female in my 30s with brown hair, and today I'm wearing a really hot pink shirt. And yeah, I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Inclusively. And I started this company a few years ago. I had another tech company while I was living over in London, which was in a totally different space. But while we were selling that company at the end of 2017, my cousin became the first licensed facialist in the state of Florida with Down syndrome. So she gives facials at a local salon. And ultimately, after getting my first facial from her, I knew this would be my next company. It was just so incredible to see how, throughout her life, she had always been obsessed with hair and makeup and beauty. And she was always washing towels at a salon happily. But clearly she was capable of a lot more. And, what I noticed the most was that when I went to get the facial, her employer only had to make some slight adjustments to her working environment. And then obviously that made her incredibly successful in what she really was passionate about and wanted to do. And so I decided I wanted to try and see how can we use technology to make it really, 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 really easy for employers to accommodate candidates' unique requests at scale. Because, the disability scale is massive. There's Down syndrome and autism. There's stress, anxiety, depression, PTSD, physical disabilities, chronic illnesses, and everything in between. And no disability is the same. And so, one accommodation for someone with autism might not be an accommodation that everyone with autism asks for. And so how can we use technology to make providing accommodations to people scalable?
Right, which is so powerful and something that we all are struggling with. Brands are struggling to find candidates with disabilities. Candidates with disabilities don't know how to identify or
But
if they can
accommodation.
identify, right. Right. Then you got the accommodation mess, or looking at it from the UK lens, since you lived in London, called adaptions. Adaptions and accommodations mean the same thing. We're talking about accommodating your employees so they can be as productive as possible for you. But it's just something we really don't have our hands around. We really don't. And I, um, I know that you're working with a lot of multinational corporations, but how do you meet their global demand for employees? Diverse employees, employees with disabilities, women with disabilities, you know, uh, people with lived experience with disabilities that are part of the LGBT community. So the intersections.
Yeah. So I think, we started with disability because that was the use case that presented itself to me on a personal level. But what we also realized is that, especially with COVID and a lot of the social injustices that have come to light over the past couple of years, um, everyone wants accommodations, and accommodations make everyone more successful and more productive. And so, what we believe is we've started with disability. It's the largest untapped talent pool. It's the one with the most use cases and the one that's most underserved right now. And it's the only category that can intersect all other diversity categories. So by solving for disability, you're actually broadening pathways for lots of different underestimated communities. And so I think from a global perspective, right now we're concentrated in the US, but we are working with a lot of multinational organizations. And I'd say two things. Right now, I think where we're very different from other companies is that we're not just aggregating the pipeline and shipping it over to the employer. We're shipping the pipeline over to the employer with accommodations up front, and anyone who picks up an inclusively resume, immediately it can be linked into our platform to view the accommodations that candidate needs, what they mean, how to provide them, why someone might ask for them, so that we're actually weaving training into the process versus relying on annual trainings to change people's behavior. And so while we're not actually live, in other countries right now, these practices can be translated over to those communities. And our path to get to sort of a global scale is really to work with our existing clients and get them to commit to opening up jobs in different territories so that we can actually launch to the community in these countries with actual jobs. Because a huge thing that I've seen with this community is that they've been burned in the past. They get lured onto websites that have lots of jobs, but they're really just scraping job sites and posting them up there. And there's no real meaningful connection between these candidates and the employer. And there's really no change in the employer's process to actually make these candidates successful. And so what we want to do is we don't want to launch in new territories and target communities until we have a good concentration of jobs in those communities. So we'll be working with our multinational partners to ensure that when we are launching a new category or new territories, that we're actually launching with meaningful jobs, positions, and companies are actually ready to hire people with disabilities.
Wow, that's very different. We don't usually do that. We usually pretend like we have all these jobs, you apply for them, you don't get it, it's because you're broken, something's wrong with you. I was just talking to a woman today that's looking for a job, and she told me everything she was doing, and I said, "Yeah, you know what? I'm so sorry to tell you, but that is not how you get a job now." She was like, "Really?" I said, "No, how's it been working?" "Well, it hasn't." So the way we get jobs now, I think, is different, and I love that you're tying the adaptions, the accessibility components to that,
And putting
because
the onerous on the employer because
they
they're
don't know where to go, right? They don't know if they're gonna get it right, and I know the good best practices, ask the individual what they want, and by the way, that is a good best practice, but sometimes the individuals don't know because they also haven't been accommodated in their
yeah.
schools and their colleges and their, so they might not know.
So
So
one of the things in our platform we realized is that candidates don't even know what they could be asking for, both
right?
to be successful on the job, but for the interview itself as well.
Okay,
And
okay,
so
good
we are
point. Good, that's
we're
a very good nuance.
we're recommending to candidates who aren't asking for accommodations, different accommodations that they could be asking for, and they have that same training on the other side so they can read about the different accommodations we have available, on our site and actually decide, this one may be a good one for me as well. So I think an interesting thing about when I started this company, and it made me think of it when you said, that the perception is you're broken and you didn't get the job.
Right, you're right. It's
That
your fault for sure. Yeah.
yeah, initially when I started this company, I have no prior experience in the disability space, so it was completely new to me. And when I initially started, I thought that we needed an algorithm that would map symptoms to skills and functions and abilities that make up the workforce so that candidates could identify what jobs, they would be able to do and accelerate in and excel in. But what I quickly realized is that there's tons of training programs, tons of nonprofits, government agencies that are actually skilling people with real skills to do jobs. And why are they not getting jobs? It's because employers' existing processes are filtering them out at various stages. And so, we pivoted the business to really focus on the root problem, which is how do you change employers' processes at scale instead of, how do we help a candidate? Candidates have all types of support already. It's just that they're still not getting jobs.
Right. And I also want to just remind the audience that 80% of people with disabilities have invisible or hidden disabilities. And so we can hide them. We can try to hide them. And why do people hide? Well, we do it because we're being disenfranchised. And so I just want to remind the audience of that, but also Charlotte. And I'm going to be honest, I would not pick on Charlotte on air. So I did ask her this question before we went on air, but this is a question I know y'all all would expect me to ask her. Is this amazing platform that you're building accessible? Because unfortunately, Charlotte, we often see that is not the case. And I know when the Valuable 500, for example, was looking for vendors, they checked out two vendors in the United States and neither of their platforms were accessible. And also, one had like 3 resumes and the other one had like 110 resumes. You cannot go to these corporations that have millions of jobs with inaccessible platforms and no people.
Exactly.
That's not that is just going to freak everybody out. So I just want to say that. So Charlotte, please tell me, because you already did, your full
Yeah.
name of
So
our community.
you mentioned Francis West, who was a really early advisor to us at the very beginning. And, when we first got started, not knowing enough in this space, we thought, oh, there's all these overlays and you can work with them. And Francis was very strongly opposed to us working with those. And she really guided us that we need to build, the foundation and the core of the platform with accessibility at the source code level. And so that's what we've done. And I think, what that means is, we do get feedback sometimes, like it didn't work with this type of screen reader, but we have an entire remediation process that's as fast as we can make it. And so we collect all that feedback and we have a remediation process so that as we get this feedback, we're building more accessible platform from the ground up. And I think what's interesting is that it also gives us a leg up against a lot of our much bigger, loftier competitors in the more mainstream space, because those companies are having to retrofit these massive platforms they've already built and go backwards into accessibility. And so I think this pulls to the point that we're all trying to make, which is being accessible, including people with disabilities, et cetera. It's also really good business sense. It's given me a very credible answer when investors are asking me, why doesn't X company do this? Why haven't they done this? And, they very well can do some of the things that we're doing, but they've got a monster platform they need to fix from an accessibility perspective. And we're growing with accessibility at the foundation.
And also, the community. You're part of the community and you've got advisors from the community. So you are the community.
I
It's
think there's a level of trust, like on a mainstream platform, a lot of them have started to ask, you can disclose that you have a disability, but why am I disclosing here? What benefit are you giving to me by me disclosing other than collecting my data? Whereas with us, they know that they're disclosing their accommodations. We don't even ask what disability you have. We just ask what accommodations you need. But they're doing so because we're helping them, we're using that data to educate employers how to hire them more successfully.
Wow, that's so powerful. Have you worked yet with the Valuable 500? Because I know we have 500 major brands really wanting to include us, and it seems like they need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, so we're listed as one of their preferred service providers. And we've, done some, I've been on some podcasts with different members of the team, but I think we're both kind of in our earlier stages. So I think, you know, I actually have on my to-do list to reach back out to them this month to see how we can coordinate better. And I think they're an amazing resource for us as well as we start to think about global expansion, because I think a lot of the companies over there um, are actually UK and more global based. And I think they've got a good variety too of jobs. I think another misconception is that only certain jobs are available to people with disabilities.
I,
And I
I
think
agree.
someone with a disability can do any job at any company. All that matters is what skills they have and what accommodations do they need. And from the employer's perspective, what skills do you need and what accommodations can you make?
I agree. And I've always said to any company that I'm working with, do not carve out jobs for us.
We don't let
Not
our
let you
companies do
carve jobs.
that.
We don't want you even creating jobs for us. We actually want you to understand that people with disabilities are people and we all have different lived experiences, different, education experiences, employment, and blah, blah. And you need people that think differently. If you hire everybody that thinks just the same, you're not going to have the
Yeah.
creative problem solvers, the innovators. No, stop. Let's stop cutting people into boxes. But I love how you're doing it, how you're thinking about it, because have been thinking about tell me what your disability is so that, we can try to understand the accommodations that you need. And really, you're not doing that. You're like, hey, tell me what your if you have accommodation needs. But at the same time, sometimes we have to educate ourselves. It might be like someone like me. I was diagnosed later in life with ADHD, but actually I qualify. If somebody hired me, I would qualify as a person with disabilities. I'm part of this community. But I've never used assistive technology that I know, right? And so, and that's not true. I've actually started using it now since I've been in the field, but it seems like also some candidates would not know what kind of accommodations that might make them more productive. I was just wondering how you deal with.
Yeah. So what we've done is we are able to map sort of based on where we're ingesting job descriptions from all these companies and we're able to put a category on it. So this one will be software engineer or whatever the category is in our taxonomy. And then for all those categories, we have tagged what accommodations should be able to be made for those jobs. So that means that, and it's not binary. It's not like if you ask for something extra, we wouldn't show that job. But what that does to help us recommend accommodations to candidates is based on the type of job they're looking for, can recommend, hey, these are the types of accommodations that could be made for this role. And so you can learn about those instead of looking at 400 accommodations and trying to piece together. We make it hyper relevant to like the types of roles you're looking for and what you could ask for on the interview and on the job to make you more successful. So we ensure that we're sort of also leading them to ask for things that are actually relevant to the job. For example, we wouldn't put remote work for a cashier that has to be in person. Um, and I think, my, dream would be that eventually our data is able to show that a data scientist, no matter where you are working, should have the same accommodations that are reasonably made available to them across organizations. And eventually we could hopefully, make amendments to the ADA where it's not just reasonable and subjective to the employer, but it's if you're offering this job, these accommodations are reasonable. And so you're actually held to some real standards versus allowing employers to decide what's reasonable and what's not.
And I just want to say that not only do we need to do that with the ADA, we also need to do it with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with
Yeah,
Disabilities, because that is going to capture everybody that doesn't have legislation in their country. So
exactly.
totally agree. And the thing I love about what you're doing, which by the way, I've not heard anyone else talking of like this. So I'm fascinated with it because this feels like this could actually start really solving the big problems that we're having. And you're being so practical about it, which I love. But have you talked to LinkedIn at all? Because I know LinkedIn, people go to LinkedIn to find jobs and to find people, and they're very tied into the employment conversation. And I know that recently, Charlotte, like a week or so ago, they created all these accessibility titles, all these accessibility job titles that you can now select from, which is such a big deal because I know I'm filling out forms and as an entrepreneur, and very rarely does the drop down menu of options that I get reflect what I really do. So how wonderful that you now can say I've actually been a chief accessibility officer or I've been an accessibility tester. So I was just curious if you're joining their conversations because it feels like that's where we try to solve it and where the problems are, right?
Yeah. So we have sort of been in discussions early with a lot of different partners like LinkedIn. We are working with, uh, I guess I'd say, a large but competitor, loosely of theirs now, hoping to be able to announce that
Okay.
potentially in October with Indeem. But I think that for us, like, we view all of these potential competitors as partners because
I
I believe that the data models that we're building, we can use them within our platforms, but other companies could also leverage them to be more inclusive on their own platforms.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so I definitely think that as we get more credibility in this space, companies like LinkedIn and others should be um, leveraging what we've built to help accelerate their efforts in this space.
I agree. And also partnering, collaborating and with them because this is not a time to collaborate with just one person. We all have to come
Exactly.
together to support each other. And and we also have to celebrate our competitors. Somebody came on this doesn't happen to me very often anymore, but somebody connected to me on LinkedIn and he said, I'm doing this. And he said, maybe you consider me a competitor. And da, da, da. And so I was like, well, I don't consider anybody.
I rarely consider anyone a competitor,
Yeah, I mean,
especially
maybe you don't want to partner and collaborate, but
if
if you're doing good for the community that I care about, yeah, I love what you're doing.
yeah,
So yeah, I don't think, yeah, and also we used to call people friendly competitors because
yeah,
sometimes I would compete with you, but sometimes I would be partnering with you.
that.
So and sometimes I'm recommending your company because mine it's not really a good fit. So always the same thing. We're stronger together. We're stronger together. Um, I want to ask you something that I know that a lot of brands are really, really struggling with is all these intersections. You talk, and I'm going to just give some examples. When we had the Me Too movement going on in, the States during the Trump presidency, a lot of employers were focused on making sure we fix some of these gender imbalances that we
Yeah.
have. But then sometimes, the world is so cruel and they kill people that are part of the LGBT community, for example. So then we're like, oh, we have got to take care of our LGBT community, which we do. Or maybe we're doing something again to African Americans. It's ridiculous what happens. But I see the brands sort of shift and jerk. And
Yeah, and we
what
need to have a collaborative fix for all of these issues are rooted at the same couple of issues. And you know, I think the disability community even sometimes tackles things in silos. Like this is for autism, this is for physical. We're all different, but I think the more you band these things together, the stronger momentum you'll have. And I think that um it can all be solved by solving a few misconceptions and educate and having education within these organizations. And I think, yeah, I think the idea that all these problems are different is not true.
I agree with you. I agree. And also, if you have set your processes up correctly, your hiring process and all thing you're talking about, Charlotte, it doesn't matter. Those problems will resolve themselves. And also, Charlotte has agreed to be an advisor for Billion Strong, which I'm so grateful for. John Kemp already does it, and so does Francis. But we do need to come together with pride and identity, but we also need to celebrate all the intersections. But working with a company like Charlotte's, they're already going to be considering all those multiple things and all those nuances. And so I think that's another reason why I wanted to highlight you as well, Charlotte,
Thank
because you're
you.
creating really great foundations that can really
Yeah,
support
go
a lot.
across the communities. I think that's one thing that Francis also taught me around universal design. And, you know, we are creating a platform right now that's helping the disability community, but let's think about how this could be applied to every other underinvested in community, like first generation college grads. What accommodations do they need? Caregivers of people with disabilities, single parents. Everyone just needs to be accommodated so that they can show up to work with their most productive and successful self.
I agree. And I want to ask you a couple more questions. And I know, as usual, I'm going too long, but I just want to go to accommodations, also known as adaptions if you're in the UK.
We also call them success enablers.
Success enablers. All right, cool. So, but employers get nervous about these things. All right. And I know that we've done a lot of studies, accommodations, blah, blah, blah. But let's just talk about this a little bit, because an accommodation could be, allowing a person. I have ADHD. I'm very hyper. And so I stand up for work. I don't sit. Please don't ask me to sit in a desk. I'm not going to. I'm going to find. So that is an accommodation. An accommodation could be someone wants to coach, a father wants to coach his daughter's Challenger League or any league, and he wants to get off early on Tuesdays. Well, okay, that's an accommodation. That's an adaptation.
Yeah.
That's yeah. So why don't you dig in just a little bit more into that? Because I think people get afraid that you're talking about, oh, great, Charlotte. You're asking me on every employee now, I'm going to have to spend thousands and thousands of
Yeah.
dollars to accommodate.
A majority of accommodations are free or under $500. And I think there's, many examples, like for an interview, someone who is neurodiverse may ask not to have a panel interview. That's free and easy to accommodate. And then, if you create that path for them, there might be other people who just thrive better in a one-to-one situation. And unless their job actually requires them to publicly speak on podcasts or, make a lot of, public speaking events, I'm not really sure a panel interview needs to happen for you to understand if that person's right for the role or not.
I love that particular example too. Wow, that's a good example. Because I'm a very social person, and sometimes panel interviews,
Because I like them better because they're more conversational, and I'm actually I'm less successful when I have to be more formal.
Oh, that's right. So, but it's right. I love that point. All right. I want to ask you one more question.
Yep.
And then the last question I'm going to ask you is, tell everybody how to get hold of you. And I know you're not going to give your phone number or your email address like I've had before happen. It's like, no, 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 no. But I'm going to agree. On this question. How do you see employers shifting from talking about DEI to actually doing it? And I just want to say that is a huge problem, because we don't really see a lot of brands really doing this well. And no criticism to the brands. I think as society we're trying to figure
Yeah.
this out now, which is why I wanted to have Charlotte on. So
I think the intention for most, statements around ESG and inclusion and DEI are genuine. It's just that how do you operationalize that down from the CEO's mouths into every hiring manager's hand? And I think that's sort of where we are spending our time in terms of developing technology to make that happen. I do think in most instances, like, people want to do the right thing, but it's very hard to do it across, large organizations and in a culture where there's just a lot of systemic biases. I will say, however, that, when we first started several years ago, disability wasn't even part of the conversation. And now every single employer that we talk to, either it's fully embedded already, or they know that they're so behind and they're like jumping at, how do we get this, pushed across as quickly as possible.
Right.
And I also think that, we now have, our sort of companies that have been with us for, a year and a half. So we've seen the changes. And while obviously the reason we're all getting up in the morning is to make the impact on the people with disabilities' lives, it's really cool to see when a company changes. Like when they provide that, when an individual provides their first accommodation, and then they come back and say, like, oh my gosh, I interviewed this person, I gave them the accommodation. And it was so easy. And you're like, this is, it takes one person at a time. And I think
I know.
companies think they have to do these big initiatives and everyone has to, know everything before you start. And literally, it can take one person who's interested in this, who starts to look at this community, starts to interview them, and is the example for everyone else. And I think that's one of the most exciting parts, because if the more we see that happen, the more the jobs and the people get hired.
I agree. And we celebrate those jobs. And by the way, employers, we want to be hired, but we also want to be retained and we want to be promoted. Just reminding you that too.
Yeah. All
Uh,
the same things with everyone else.
That's right, just like everybody else. So, all right. I know that I went a little bit long, but Charlotte, how do people get a hold of you? And also, I would like you to come back on the show in a couple months and give us an update too.
I would love
I really am very interested in how you are handling this situation. I think it's the way to go move forward. So compliments.
Oh, thank you. Well, that means a lot coming from someone who is incredibly knowledgeable in this space. But in terms of getting a hold of me, I'm on LinkedIn and I try to get back to anyone who reaches out there. But also, we have our website, which is inclusively.com. And if you go into the contact us section, we have people that are responding almost instantaneously to everything that comes through there, whether it's sales question, whether you're a candidate, everything is all available there. And so, yeah, I hope to hear from some of you.
So just to see how your spelling works, do you mind spelling inclusively?
Yeah.
Just to make sure if anybody's hearing it, they can hear how you spell how to type it in.
Yes, it's www.inclusively, inclusively.com.
I don't know if I could do it. So
Right? A grinder, not that was actually quite difficult for me.
no, I totally get it. That's why you have to name the company your name. So hopefully you know your name now. No, that's right.
Yep.
Anyway, well, thank you, Charlotte, for being on the show. I love what you're doing. I'm so
you.
excited about it. I can't wait to see it unfold. And I really do think she's onto something. So if you are a brand and you're listening to this and you want to really socially do this correctly, I think you need to go and talk to Charlotte. Just really amazing what they're doing over there. And we need to support the businesses that are really trying to make things better for all of us. So thank you, Charlotte. And I'm going to send you the link so that you can come back on. So we want to keep hearing about this. So thank you so much to everyone, and we will talk to you on the next show.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Human Potential at Work. To learn more about Rue Global Impact, visit rueglobal.com. And to learn more about Billion Strong, an identity and empowerment organization designed to bring the billions of voices of persons with disabilities together, you can join the global community and donate at billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org.